Why is Sub Rogue so good? It could be because of the damage, but really, it's because of the rework. The talent design made it possible to feel more like a rogue, but more than that, the cooldown management gives you the flexibility to make people go,
Yo, what the fuck? Why is Sub Rogue doing damage?
I'll go over all of the cool things you can expect from Sub and tell you why the difficulty of playing it is more rewarding than actually looting the actual item you're actually farming with a socket and leech. It's no surprise to anyone that Sub is the ginger middle child of the Rogue family at the moment. It has been like this before and it rose back up to take the cake eventually. Either way, with the rework that Rogue received in 10.2, Sub is seeing some much needed gameplay changes that make the spec feel a 180 from what it was before. Considering Sub has been in the spotlight much more consistently than the other two for the past 2 to 3 years, it's not that bad. And if a spec has to be underpowered and be where Sub is now, I am actually fine with it. Sub is probably the perfect amount of not meta with moments where you'll outshine people if they chill on their FOMO picks and not worry about being as good as they can be, and definitely destroy them if they don't work as hard to learn and execute their specs as well as you will. Catching people off guard with the off-meta spec is always satisfying, and Sub has made that possible for a non-rogue player like myself. Imagine what it can do for you. The damage is good. It won't blow your socks off considering Outlaw is like right there next to you when you do Mythic Plus keys and Assassination, ready and waiting for the raid invite. It's still nothing to sneeze at, or actually pretty good all things considered. The issue is that the shadow, pun intended, cast by the other two specs is too big, and the community perception too biased for Sub to ever be properly considered. I can show you some logs like these to paint a picture and hopefully make you accept that Sub is good when it comes to damage output. I'm sure that to the plus 17 key pusher Maestro that declines 480 eye level subs in favor of 450 Havoc Demon Hunters is going to look at this and be confused why his worldviews are all messed up, close his eyes, drink more of the MDI elitist juice, and call his tank a noob for not pulling the exact pack in the exact spot like they do in the esports. Bottom line is, the spec is good, play it, and if your worries the damage output and you're not pushing 27s at this moment, you're going to be fine with Sub. And if anything, the damage is what makes it really interesting, with the best example being Smolderon in the raid, where Sub is actually crushing everyone. The only thing left to crush is our Patreon page, the butter to the bread of our content creation. Patreon helps us make more of these videos and a lot of other things possible for MarcelianOnline. If you like this content and want to support your boys, head on down there on patreon.com/MarcelianOnline and check it out. On top of giving us a hand in making more cool stuff, you also get access to some goodies like custom-made wallpapers with your character's transmogs, Patreon exclusive podcasts, earlier access videos, and such. Plus, of course, our undying gratitude, which is never said enough. Thanks guys for making it possible for us to do what we love, and we can only hope we get to have you guys watch cool shit you enjoy. The flexibility of the talents brought about 6 builds you can play as an up-and-coming sub-rogue in your 10.2 adventures for raids and dungeons. I'm not going to go in depth on all of them, but we'll talk about the invigorating Shadow Dust variant, which can be played in both raids and Mythic Plus keys, and is also the reason why Sub is destroying Smolderon damage meters and logs. The Shadow Dust talent is not necessarily new, and it does more or less the same thing as before, reducing your cooldowns and bringing them back up faster. And now you do that with 2 charges of Vanish, giving you a massive flexibility when it comes to aligning them. And align them you want, because there's quite a few of them and they all have different timings. You might say that the design is bad when the cooldowns don't naturally sync. I would say you are wrong. The design is bad when the cooldowns can never sync properly. but they can if you play them well enough. And on top of that, the burst you get from the cooldowns lining up is so redonkulous that they kind of have to make them not naturally sync. Plus, if they did, the spec would be a lot more boring and less rewarding. The thing is, you have quite a few cooldowns to go through. You obviously have Shadow Dance, which makes most of this possible, but with it you use Symbols of Death and Secret Technique almost always, especially by building the Dance Macabre stacks, as you can snapshot the finisher properly. It gets way juicier when you get Flagellation and Shadow Blades, which have different cooldowns each. And if you think of the 2 Vanish charges as cooldowns on top of the 2 Shadow Dance charges as well, you start to have quite a few buttons to juggle. Oh, and Shuriken Tornado in AoE, can't forget about that. By using your Vanish charges right, you get to bring your big blaster cooldowns up faster and create those insane logs on Smolderon. I actually attempted this in the footage you are seeing right now, and it actually worked out. I may not be smoking the meters like those legends on Warcraft logs, but I have also been playing the spec for 2 days prior to this and was 10 to 15 eye levels below the gamers here. Except that Unholy DK, but Unholy is not a real spec anyway, so who cares? Moving on, the coolest thing about this build is that it gives you the flexibility to adapt to the situation on the spot. You may be caught by surprise, whether it is in a raid phase that happened quicker or a pool in keys that was not planned. You can use Vanish to almost instantly get a Shadow Dance charge and refresh your entire Symbols of Death cooldown and burst on demand. Do that again and you get your Flagellation and Shadow Blades down to a minute cooldown each and have them up at the start of the fight and immediately after. The fact that Vanish has 2 charges now makes it so much smoother to just stay on one of them for a while and look at what is going on around you, and when shit starts to heat up, pop a Vanish like a true sub-rogue and blammo, you are ready to go. And hey, you may find all of this a bit overwhelming, like I did at first. And there are flexible ways to change the difficulty of the spec and still deal giga DPS. You won't do as much, but if you had issues playing the build properly to begin with, likely you will do more damage with a simpler build that has fewer, if any, punishing moments that can tank your performance. You can just move away from Shadow Dust, which is the thing that actually complicates the build, and put a point in Premeditation and another in Deeper Daggers. This way you will likely not have to ever press Slice and Dice also, which makes maintaining it a lot easier, because damn it, having to pop it up always is like trying to open the door while carrying 3 stacked bosses in your arms going up the stairs. Overall, the execution will be easier and noticeably less punishing. I have always been a proponent of varied builds and playstyles so that the experience of playing a spec can keep me engaged and coming back to it. Ironically, Sub is both a good example of variety, but also consistency when it comes to its builds, since you can opt to play something specific for all content and not have to worry about talent swaps if that's your jam. Which is weird, because normally you don't get to have both of those things in a spec, since they kind of contradict themselves. Similarly to Assassination, which we already did a video on, Sub actually makes you feel like a proper rogue, a ninja rogue, a subtle rogue, a rogue of stealthy goodness. All of the shadow things that Sub could do just seem really cool in 10.2 and feel like you really just come out of the shadow to mess things up. The feeling is important because the game has been dangerously close to losing its heart and soul when it comes to a bunch of stuff, making the soul still left in subtlety feel even more important. On top of that, the actual gameplay feels so good. It's different from other specs, obviously, but it has a very satisfying feel to it when you do your secret technique at the just right amount of Dance Macabre stacks, when you get back-to-back finishers from the Shadow Technique's passive and end up just laughing at the fact that you haven't pressed backstab in like 10 seconds while seeing all the eviscerates go out. There are actually very few boring moments in your rotation. You hardly ever just play a vanilla rogue where you build combo points with backstabs and spend them on eviscerates, or the AoE equivalent. Since your mini cooldowns come back so fast, the little breather is just that, a breather. Cause just a few seconds later, it's time to dance again, baby. Pun totally intended. And if you think your life just needs a bit more poison and grade A single target damage, then Assassination is definitely up your alley. And hey, the gear it shares with sub is very similar, making it an easy swap. And yeah, we have a video on it since you've been staring at it for a few seconds now, so you just now have to click it, clearly.